And so
just roll that again, Louise.
All right. Oh, hi, everyone. We're beaming in from Benalla and Sandhurst and Paige. Are you in Williamstown?
No, I'm in Geelong, south of Geelong, near the Surf Coast. Yeah.
Beautiful place to be. So we're now recording, and we record the interview, the visual part. We don't record the chat room, so we love the chat conversation to go on. Because whilst we're always engrossed in conversation and entertain, we are thinking faster than we are talking. So we can have that extra conversation, which I'll look after today, keep in contact with you. Cynthia is the host, interviewing our first time to have the second presenter return. We have lots of firsts every week. We encourage you to, when you chat, to select all panellists and attendees. So you've got a little drop-down box to select that, but you can private message. We have a Q&A box if you want a question for us three to see it, rather than everyone else see it, to ask on your behalf. And yes, go ahead with your questions in the chat room. You'll see I'm looking up a bit. I'm just looking, I've got a bigger screen with the chat room. So just keeping an eye on who's here. So now we've got about 15 participants. What else do I need to say, Cynthia?
Keep asking questions, and we've switched to a new format so that we're doing 45 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Oh, thanks for that, Jeanette. We'll investigate that about the link. Sorry. Hopefully,
okay.
That problem. So we finish at 1:45 today, and we'll stick around for 10 or 15 minutes afterwards if you want to hang around and have a chat. So I'd love to welcome back this superstar, one of our superstar guests, Paige, Dr. Paige Williams. And so Paige came to us a few, probably, 6 or 8 weeks ago. But at the time, she told us that she was releasing her first book. So we thought we need to get Paige back, because we know that you love Paige and we love Paige, and there's so much wisdom that Paige has got to offer for our well-being. So Paige's book, and I'm going to get my interviewing glasses on today, they're filthy, but Paige's book is called Anti-Fragile, and so this conversation today is going to be around her learnings from the book and how we can apply that to our well-being. So, Paige, first of all, can you tell us what is anti-fragile? What does that actually mean?
Sure, of course, I'd love to, Cynth. So the book is, I'm going to do this first. So this is the book. This is one of my pre-copies. It's called Becoming Anti-Fragile, Learning to Thrive Through Disruption, Challenge and Change. And the reason I share that is because really the subtitle says it all. And this is something I've learned. When you write a book, the title is not the thing, the subtitle is the thing, because that really tells us what a book is all about. And when we think about what is anti-fragility or what is anti-fragile, it's that capacity to thrive as we deal with uncertainty. And it's been a pretty amazing year to be writing this book in. I actually started it in about September last year, but as obviously 2020 has unfolded, and I was already calling this the decade of disruption, because there were already a number of very kind of large system level dynamics going on in terms of technology, in terms of ways of working, in terms of the structures in our families and in our home life. And in terms of really big dynamics like the polarities between rich and poor and have-nots. And we were really polarizing as a society. And the complexity that was coming with that meant that we were set up for a pretty disruptive decade anyway. But with everything that's unfolded this year, the need for us to become anti-fragile has really amplified to such a greater extent. And so anti-fragility is about understanding, firstly, how is it we make ourselves fragile? And we know how it feels to feel fragile. I know I've felt this many a time. It's that day where you don't want to come out from under the doona, right? Where everything feels like it's just too much. And whether that's because of things going on at home or with family or in your work. And then when we're beyond that, we feel like we can peek over the top of the doona and we'll kind of be able to deal with whatever is thrown at us. And that's when we might feel a sense of robustness. We can withstand it. Or even if we have to duck back down under for a while, we'll do that, but then we'll poke back up and we'll be okay again. And that's that bouncing back of resilience. But when we're anti-fragile, we're able to look over the top of the doona, see what's there. And it's not necessarily always good. It's not necessarily always comfortable, but we're able to throw the doona off and get out of bed anyway. And really that's...
It's like we're interrupting our own pattern, is it? Is that what we're doing? We're more aware, so then we're able to choose to think differently. Is that right?
It is, and it's part of that, and it's the acceptance that actually alongside struggle, we can thrive, even as we experience the discomfort of struggle. And I think one thing that's happened this year is that we have all really keenly felt that experience of struggle. And so becoming anti-fragile, one, helps us be more accepting that struggle is a part of the human experience. The second part of becoming, or a second part of becoming anti-fragile, is understanding that actually at some level we need this. You know, when you think about those times when everything is very comfortable and you're not really being challenged, they can be quite stagnant times in our lives. And so as complex human systems, we actually need some challenge, and we need some kind of almost adversity in order to bring out the best in ourselves. And it's a third really critical part, which I think we're all having to really lean into this year, is accepting that we can't control everything in our environment. And dealing with the lack of control, and with that perhaps the fear and anxiety and a feeling of lack of safety that comes along with that, but accepting that actually that is the reality of the world that we live in. It always has been. But now I think this year in particular, with COVID and with the other dynamics in the world right now, it's really being pushed to the surface, and our boundaries and buttons are being pushed in all kinds of ways because of that.
So Paige, in your book, you talk about the gift of struggle, which I love that term, the gift of struggle. So for those of us who, when that's all of us at times, do struggle, and perhaps we Victorians might be struggling a little bit more than our free cousins over in WA and Queensland. Boo to you, boo. We're so jealous.
We are jealous.
What can we take? How can we feel better if we're struggling about that gift of struggle?
Okay, so I think one thing that can be helpful is to think about a time in your life when you felt really proud of something that you've achieved or contributed to. And I often do this with leaders and teams that I work with, and I like to use the word pride. So often we'll say, when have you been at your best? Or when have you really achieved something that you didn't think you could achieve? But when we bring in this sense of pride, it connects us back to our values, and it connects us back to intrinsic motivation. So think about when you really feel that you've contributed in some way that you're proud of, that you've really shown up and been the person that you want to be. And as you think about kind of the full extent of that experience, ask yourself, was there struggle involved in that? And I can't say 100% of the time, but from my experience in doing this activity with hundreds of leaders and teams, I can say that 99% of the time, there will have been struggle involved in that in some way. And yet you came through that struggle and you thrived in terms of actually making a contribution that you were proud of, or showing up in a way that you were proud of. So we tend to want to back away from struggle. We tend to want to try and avoid it. And when we do that, we play small and we stay safe. And yet if we actually reflect on our reality and our lived experience, we find that actually struggle is what can be our friend. It's what can kind of make us pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and be the best version of ourselves, and do things that make us proud of who we are and what we've contributed to. So struggle can be our friend because
struggle's good. Sorry, Paige, struggle's actually good for our well-being.
it is, because it helps us stretch boundaries. It helps us perhaps go into territory that we wouldn't otherwise go to. And it can really help us expand our boundaries in terms of understanding what's possible for us and what contribution is possible that we can make.
So what advice might you give those people out there who are homeschooling again in terms of struggle, Paige? What have you got anything for them? What tips have you got for maybe some people who might be feeling a bit daunted about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things that's really important struggle and thriving can go hand in hand, but we need to embrace struggle from very much a space of kindness and generosity. So we don't create a rod to beat ourselves up with and kind of self-flagellate, oh, I've got to struggle more, I've got to struggle more. That's not a healthy way to embrace the struggle. It is to accept this idea of, we're not in control of whether we're able to choose to homeschool or not. So there's an acceptance piece there. There's also, I think, an acceptance of what are the expectations now that we might have that are realistic in this, and recognizing that we're not struggling alone in this. And it's okay to open up conversation about, hey, how are you struggling with this? And what can we do to support you? Here's how I'm struggling, and this is how I need support. And certainly as I'm talking to lots of leaders and teams, and my friends and family as well, just inviting that conversation around where is the struggle and how can we support each other through this is one way to invite it in rather than trying to resist it and push it away and close it down. And by doing that, we actually help our brains feel safer because we feel like we're in this together, but also we're being solution oriented in terms of asking the question, okay, what support do you need? What support do I need to help us get through this struggle time?
Yep, terrific. And so, Paige, I'm just wondering about, because we were talking about your model of that is in the book that you outline about the robust model, and we might have touched on this in our last session, but I just wondered if you can explain that in the wellbeing context.
Sure, of course. So what I might do is I'm going to share just a slide, and I think that will help people have a little visual link. So let's just make sure I can share. Would you mind just giving me sharing rights?
Yeah, sure. That's
perfect.
Awkward because I thought you did because you were a panelist. There we go. That's why. All panelists.
Okay.
For it.
So I'm hoping everyone can see that. There's a slide on screen with just the word robust. So these are the 6 principles that I've developed in the book, and these are to help us understand how we can become anti-fragile. And then when we look at these, particularly through a well-being lens, we apply them to our energy, our attitude, and our mindsets. So I'm just going to do a quick overview of these, and then we can talk a bit more about how we apply them to help us become anti-fragile and support well-being. So R in the robust principles, I just need to click on here so it knows it's reading this. Here we go. R stands for recruit the brain. And this means that we need to understand just a little bit about neuroscience, because otherwise we're fighting physiology if we try and work against the way our brains are wired. So R is recruit the brain. O is operate in reality. So once we've got we're harnessing the physiological side of our brains, we then need to flick over to the psychology and think about our minds and how is it that actually the stories that we tell ourselves can sometimes be the things that trip us up. So we need to operate in reality. So that's the O. The B, there's a double B. The one on screen is break the negative. And what I've been super conscious of as I've been teaching psychology and positive psychology and leadership over the last 10, 15 years is that we tend to want to add more in. And we get this fatigue and overwhelm just from the things that we're meant to be doing to support our own well-being. So we're kind of working against ourselves. So the first thing I suggest that we need to do is break the negative. And what I mean by that is, how is it we can remove some of the things that we're doing that are making us fragile? How is it that we can create space then to build the positive, to build things that can help us become anti-fragile? But we need to break the negative first to create space to do that. The U stands for Use Intelligent Risk. And this is about this test and learn mentality. So how is it that we can build up our muscles around failure, around just being able, feeling a bit uncertain about things by engaging in risk, but in an intelligent way. So I sometimes call this the tinkering mentality as well, the tinkering mindset, so that we look to take small experiments and reuse ideas in different contexts across different, whether that's homework, home life, whether that's at work, whether it's with different teams and groups that we're engaged with, and we do different experiments and recycle ideas to see what works. So that's using intelligent risk. The S is seek collective wisdom. And this is about understanding becoming anti-fragile is not a solo endeavor. We need to bring on other perspectives, other team, we need to get team support behind us to help us on our way. And then the T stands for tackle the infinite game. And this is about taking us beyond short-term goals and understanding that this anti-fragile journey is something that we go on throughout our life, because our context changes. Who would have thought a year ago that we would be where we are now? So the need for us to become anti-fragile never goes away because our context is always changing, whether that's a new job, a new relationship, the ending of something, the beginning of something, something changing. There's always a need for us to learn, adapt, and thrive in a new environment. Mm. So those are the 6 robust principles in super quick form.
Oh, terrific. And so we also want to encourage our participants today, please keep asking questions. If you want Paige to clarify anything, if you're a bit unsure about what something means, then please ask the question, because you can be sure if you've got the question, probably someone else does. And just keep your questions coming as well, because we'll make sure that, because we want to really make this session practical to your life as well. So if there's something that you're going, how would I apply that to this situation, then let us know that. That would help everyone. Sorry, Paige. So now from that framework then, and in your book again, you go in and you explain each of those concepts more. And I loved in the Use Intelligence Risk, and you termed it the art of tinkering.
Yes.
I really, that really appealed to me. It had a really playful, I liked it because, risk, often we think, oh, if I make a mistake, it's very serious and we clench up. And then that makes us afraid. But tinkering kind of goes, oh, I can tinker. I can.
That's exactly it.
Mm.
Absolutely, you've nailed it, Synth, and that's it. It's about holding things lightly and letting go of, because you're right. When we think about risk, we do this, okay, and we want to play small, and we kind of go like this. And yet, actually, if we can hold it lightly and say it's an experiment, I'm trying something. And one of the ways we can be smart or use intelligent risk is, I'm going to try an experiment over here. And it might be just asking a question or having a conversation in that team meeting or with that individual. And I'm going to see how that goes. And I introduce something in the book called Learning Loop, which is where we try something, we act, we see how it went, we assess, and then we do something different next time based on that assessment. We adjust. And so you go through these learning loops.
So, one sec. Oh, it was a learning loop. Sorry, you froze on my screen. I'm not sure if that happened to everyone.
Yeah, so the learning loop where we act, we assess, and we adjust. And we do that over here. And then we take that learning, because learning, wonderful thing about learning is it's so transportable. And we come over here and we have this conversation and we say, what I learned from over there, I'm just going to tweak how I have this conversation or introduce this idea in this team meeting, and I'm going to do it differently. And then we take the learning and we move it over here. So we've just got this constant learning loop. We're tinkering, we're playing around with things, and we're what I call learning forward, because we take our learning and we move it forward, and we try something else on the basis of that. So that's that kind of tinkering, test and learn mentality, which stops us being so scared of trying new things and taking little risks, little digestible risks that aren't going to choke us.
And wouldn't it be terrific if more of our leaders had this art of tinkering? I feel there's a lot of pressure that leaders sometimes feel like they have to have the answer and be right all the time.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I talk about in the book as well, Cynth, is this idea of we need to seek collective wisdom. We need to let go, whether that's because we're in a formal leadership role, or whether that's in our leadering role in our families or with our friendship groups. How is it that we need to not think that we have to have all the answers? And I've lived this. I remember my role in the family was, you know, I was the project manager. You know, I managed diaries and food and holidays and worked, and I did this and that. And consequently, the limit of our kind of creativity in that system was me, because I was holding it all. And yet actually, if I'd opened it up so that we had input from the girls and from their dad, all of a sudden we've got 4 lots of collective wisdom, 4 lots of experience, 4 lots of ideas and creativity, rather than just one. And also, I don't feel so weighed down by it all. And so this idea of seeking collective wisdom really gives us more perspectives. It gives us more ideas for those experiments that we might want to try out. And because of that, we're spreading risk, and that helps us become anti-fragile. It means that we're not just a one-horse race where it's all my ideas, and if they get blown out of the water, we haven't got alternatives to work with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's amazing, Paige. I feel because there's a lot of, we've got at least one fellow on the call, hello Nosh, but we've got mainly women on the call, and I feel that definitely a lot of women can do that with their role around in the family, that we talk about the role of project manager, the work that's hidden. And so sometimes I think the best solution is to let go, because that enables space for others to step up and contribute.
That's absolutely right, Cynth. And you know, part of the reason I'm so passionate about this work is because I've lived so much of this. And that was one of the things I had to do in my family, was consciously go, okay, I've got to step back and I've got to create space for others to lean in. And I think that for leaders, formal, informal leaders in workplaces, in families, doing that is sometimes the most powerful thing you can do as a leader, is actually to lean out. And I call it and sit on your hands. Lean out, sit on your hands and dial up your curiosity. Ask lots and lots of questions and listen, rather than trying to give the answers and fill the space. And a story I share around this is, I remember when my girls were learning to swim, and their dad Darren was in the water, and this was Olivia, our eldest, and we got them swimming when they were super young. So Liv was less than a year old, and I was not in the pool with Liv in this lesson. And I remember it was the lesson where babies first go under. Okay, now that's a bit of a point for any parent. And Darren was in the water with them, and we got to this point and he let go of Liv, and sure enough, Liv went under. And every fiber in my body wanted me to dive into the pool and save her. But I knew that I had to sit on my hands and stay in my seat, because otherwise she would never learn the lesson that actually she would just naturally rise to the surface and be okay. And I think that idea of actually sometimes we need to just sit on our hands, stay in our seat and stay open and curious is one of these pieces around letting go of control and needing to have all the answers.
Yeah, thanks, Paige. Now I'm just noticing there's a few comments and questions, Louise.
Yes, Cynthia, in particular from Liz Patterson. Liz is saying, I find it tricky when I want to contribute more, but there is not the space given. So Paige, any suggestions on this for getting others to create the space?
I find that, Liz, I find that questions are the most powerful way for us to start kind of, you almost need to sometimes crack something in order to create space for new things to come in. So I often have found that when there is a leader that is trying to control things, rather than challenging, which means that that can sometimes mean you'll just get resistance and pushback, how is it that we can use questions? And it's quite a you'll need to find quite a benign question to start that won't feel threatening to the leader, and start with that question, and that then opens up discussion rather than is very much targeted back at them. And so a question that begins something like, have we explored, can be useful because it's a very gentle way to ask that. Or is another way we could look at this, and then ask a question around that. So without knowing the specifics of your situation, Liz, I do find that questions can be the way to gently crack a team or a situation open enough for there to be a bit more space around it. But understand that people lock things down through a feeling of wanting to have control and feel safe. And so we need to help them feel safe in opening things up as well. I find questions, if done in that kind of very generous, non-threatening way, can be a safe way to crack a system open.
And I think that some of the work by Judith Glasser on conversational intelligence and questions, she says that we can ask questions just so that we can then tell someone what we think, and it's that asking questions from a genuine place of can I really understand? I really would like to understand.
And that's it. It's coming at it with this generous curiosity of, I'm not doing this for self-interest or self-fulfillment. I'm doing this to serve the purpose of what's going on in the room, and creating space and getting more diverse opinions in this conversation is the service piece in that. So yeah.
Louise.
Judith is amazing.
Yeah, terrific. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, well, Gina Milgate offered us a reflective question that we could all implement at some stage. In what ways can we make people feel comfortable in the uncomfortable? So I share stories about struggle, fragility, so that it becomes part of the way we do things. So I'm assuming, and Gina could correct me, that that's just a great example of a question that we can use in teams, just to get the question and style of question as part of the norm.
It's so true, because understanding, and this is part of the recruit the brain principle, is that understanding that the main purpose or the main operating parameters for our brain is to keep us safe. It's a survival mechanism. So, you know, keeping us safe can be in a space that's kind of this small, or how is it that by normalizing that actually a level of discomfort and uncertainty is okay, we start to expand what that safety zone is. And that's how understanding how the brain works means that we actually encourage those conversations, so that one, we don't feel alone, but two, we normalize struggle and we normalize uncertainty and discomfort. And by doing that, we kind of expand the space that we have to play in.
Terrific. Now, Paige, I just want to ask you more about the your energy, attitudes, and mindsets theory, and part of your anti-fragility theory.
Sure, love to. So the robust principles are exactly that. They're kind of guiding touchstones that you can use, and as Cinth said, there's more details on it in the book, to kind of guide your becoming anti-fragile journey. But when we think about where we need to start that, generally where we start a journey is with ourselves before we start thinking about perhaps our teams or our families or anything larger than that. And I really believe that whatever form of leadering that we're doing in our lives, we need the right energy, we need the right attitudes, and we need the right mindsets in order to show up in that space. So when I thought about how do we apply the robust principles in a way that's meaningful for people in their everyday lives, energy, attitude, and mindset just seemed the obvious place to start. So I'll give you some examples of how we apply these principles to energy, attitude, and mindset. So for example, if you think about your energy, and you know, I agree with you so much, Synth. I think that now in Victoria, we're feeling like we've had a real kind of slug in the guts, and our energy is feeling quite depleted. The word I'm hearing a lot is fatigued. People are feeling really fatigued. So when we think about energy, and if we employ the robust principle of use intelligent risk, it means that we're doing multiple experiments, right? And because of that, we've got options. So when we think about how can we keep our energy high in these kind of challenging times, we need to have multiple sources so that we've got multiple options to draw from. So in the book, I suggest that, yes, we need to look after our physical energy. And we do that by making sure we get enough rest, by making sure that we replenish with good food and that we're drinking water regularly, et cetera, and that what I call rouse. So we actually get up and we're active. So even if we are working from home, even if we are restricted in our movement outside the home, like I bought myself a skipping rope at Kmart just before we went into lockdown, and I skip in the backyard when we weren't allowed out. So literally 60 seconds of something that gets your heart moving, if it's squats, if it's jumping jacks, whatever it is, that really helps your energy system. Now, that's physical energy. What about mental energy? Well, physical and mental, and I'll come on to emotional energy, are all tied. But mental energy, you know, I'm hearing a lot, and there was some research released from Microsoft this week. It's in an HBR, Harvard Business Review article. They've been analysing what's the impact of virtual and online working been in the 6 months of this year. And their research suggests that actually we shouldn't be online now in a meeting type environment for more than about 30 minutes.
Whoa.
Yeah. Okay. Particularly now because it's been going on for 6 months. So again, that comes back to our recruit the brain principle. Let's not fight physiology. Let's understand what our capacities are, and equally what our capacities are in terms of our mental energy. So if you find that you've got back-to-back Zoom meetings or that you're online a lot, there are a number of research reports that have been done that suggest that actually whatever we're working on, we work effectively for about 50 minutes before we need a break. So how is it, even if wherever we're physically located for work, we can be smart about the way that we manage our mental energy. And
yeah,
then
you mentioned a study where the people worked, was it for 57 minutes and then had a 17-minute break, and they were the most productive people in the office?
That's right, yeah. So that's a company called Dragwem, and that's a case study I use in the book. And you know, the way I take that research and apply it in my own life is I tend to work in hourly blocks. So I'll work 50 minutes out of a 60-minute block. And in that 10 minutes that I'm not working, I might do some skipping in the garden. I'll put a load of washing on. I'll make sure I get another drink, and I might have a little snack. So it's not something that needs to, you know, I'm really conscious. We don't need more to do in our lives. So how is it we can be smart about the way that we do what we already need to do, and we do that in a more smart way that helps us become anti-fragile. Now, the final thing of energy, so if we've got two sources in physical and mental, the third source is our emotional energy, and it's probably the one that's most neglected. But it's the one that at the moment I really feel is what can help us get through this fatigue stage that we're particularly at in Victoria with COVID. So how is it we can find what are called jolts of joy? How is it we can understand what it is that brings us joy? Now, for me, you're going to laugh at this, it's the first sip of my latte in the morning with my homemade protein ball, right? And it's the chocolatey thingy of the protein ball with the warm of the coffee. And that's just like, that's my of the day. Or if I'm being really indulgent, it's the first sip of red wine at night. or it's a particular song, or it's my conversation with you, Synth, because we use each other as a little jolt of joy, don't we? To ring each other and go, hey, how you going? What's happened to you today? So finding what are those things that are going to give you the emotional boost. So we've got 3 sources of energy. We've got physical, mental, and emotional. And how is it we can make sure that we're drawing from all of these as we move through these challenging and uncertain times, and that we're deliberately replenishing each of them as well, so that if one is a bit low, we've got other sources of energy to draw from.
Terrific. And so you also talk just very quickly, attitudes and mindsets. And so if we can touch quickly on attitudes, and then in your book, you had this fascinating study on, which I hope you can mention, on maids and their attitude towards exercise, which I thought was really interesting.
Absolutely. Okay. So briefly, so attitudes are the way that we judge the world. Okay. So imagine that you're in a Judge Judy, and attitudes are what make you decide whether you like something or you hate something. So if I say Donald Trump, you probably know what your attitude is. If I say Brussels sprouts, you probably know what your attitude is. So you make a judgment about something. And so anti-fragile attitudes are attitudes that help us lean in to discomfort. So one of the anti-fragile attitudes I talk about, and there are 3, they are constructive, courageous, and I've forgotten my third one because I'm in the constructive, courageous, and it's another C. It'll come back to me.
Compassion? No?
No. It's okay. Let me tell the story and it will come back as I tell it. So a courageous anti-fragile attitude is about perhaps naming the elephant in the room. So this speaks perhaps to what you were talking to, Liz, which where there's an issue that's not being raised. And so how is it you can create the space to name the elephant in the room? And so perhaps, Liz, what you were talking to was no one really feels they're being heard or they can make a contribution in this team. And so the judgment to make then is, how do I lean in? Am I going to lean into this opportunity, or am I going to lean away? And an anti-fragile attitude is what takes you towards leaning in and showing courage in that moment. Now, in terms of mindset, mindsets are slightly different than attitudes. Mindsets are the way that we understand how the world works. So this is the way that we believe things should be, okay? So they color everything that we look at. The study that Cynthia is talking about was fascinating. It was done with, and it shows how mindsets then actually influence so many other things in how we show up and behave. So a group of maids in a hotel were taught about the influence of mindset on their lives. And they were measured before and after in terms of how they viewed their mindset towards their work. Now, their work was cleaning rooms in the hotel, and they were asked about what level of physical activity they did, how attractive they felt they were, how physically fit they felt they were. So they were asked that. They then went through this mindset training, which explained to them the power of mindsets in actually creating their reality rather than just being in response to it. And then they were measured on those same questions afterwards. And they found that the group that had gone through mindset training, which was compared with a group that hadn't, the group that had received the mindset training, their attitudes had shifted in terms of the way they saw the value of their work, the level of physical activity they were involved with, how attractive they found themselves, their physical bodies, but also their things like their blood pressure had gone down, they had lost weight, and they had done nothing different. They had done nothing different in terms of their work, and a number of them had chosen then to take up other more positive health behaviors because they were seeing their work differently, because it had been suggested that actually their work contributed to their health and fitness overall. So this mindset piece isn't just influenced by reality, it actually shapes and determines our reality. And so our anti-fragile mindsets are growth mindsets around learning and growth, benefit mindsets around understanding the importance of contribution, And this means that we show up in the world in a different way and that we engage in it differently as well.
Paige, your book is amazing. I got a little sneak preview, and it's been really terrific. Now, I don't want to stop this conversation, but I'm just conscious of time. So, what are we going to send them? Send out.
Right. So there's two things, right? So the first thing is, this week we launched the Anti-Fragile survey. So this is a free survey. Takes less than 10 minutes to complete. One of my friends, Claire, is going to pop into the chat room the URL so that you can go to that straight away off the back of this call. And you will get this report, which will show you where you are at in terms of your fragility and anti-fragility. It will also show you which of the robust principles you appear to be using more and less, and how you're going in terms of your anti-fragile energy, attitudes, and mindsets. And then it gives you some background information and some ideas about what you could do to put that into action. So that's number one. Number two is launch day for the book.
We'll put that in the email that we send everyone as well on Friday.
And then the second thing is, please, please, please buy the book on Tuesday. Tuesday, the 28th of July is our launch day. We're going for #1 Amazon bestseller on that day. So please buy the book on the Tuesday, the 28th of July. And if you do, and you would like to be entered into a draw, you send, and I'll put these details in the email too, just send a proof of receipt for the 28th of July, and you can enter a draw to come to an exclusive masterclass with me. There'll only be 16 people at the masterclass. I'll answer any questions you've got on the book and go through your anti-fragile survey results as well. So almost like a small group coaching.
Fantastic. That is absolutely terrific. Thank you, Paige. That's so generous. Just really conscious of time. Louise, what are we going to do?
Let's just get a quick question. Lisa's been waiting patiently.
Yep. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So
yeah, great. Yeah, thanks, Paige.
Do that.
Yeah.
There.
So, Paige, what's a great way to interact with someone who likes acknowledgement from listeners whilst they speak, to feel they are being heard whilst they voice themselves? It's Lisa Brassington.
Say that again, sorry. What's a great way to acknowledge someone?
What's a great way to interact with someone who likes acknowledgement from listeners while they speak, to feel they are being heard whilst they voice themselves?
So is that a virtual question, as in?
Yeah, Lisa's still there. I might just.
Yeah, give her the
Lisa.
mic. A bit more context.
Hi, Lisa.
It's basically so you don't interrupt someone. So sometimes it's hard for people to find their voice. When they find their voice, they're using it and they're going through their stream of consciousness. But at the same time, they're a person that likes acknowledgement. But you as an assertive person don't want to interrupt them, but you want to show a really kind way to acknowledge. And so I often find that dance quite hard, that they think you might be interrupting, but in fact, you're just trying to support them with their voice.
Okay. And so this, I mean, if we were face to face, I feel like these would be like non-verbal cues. And so is that what you mean, Lisa? So we're in conversation with someone, you don't want to interrupt them. Yeah. And so this is the nodding and that is more difficult when we're in a virtual environment.
Yeah.
I'm just checking I'm understanding your question, Lisa.
Yeah, you're on the ball, Paige.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you've got some a toolkit or some tips and hints.
So I think it's a lot of the non-verbal cues. I mean, certainly that's what I'm getting from Louise and Synth as I'm talking, and the rest of you are on screen, and that's what off screen, and that can be challenging. I know. I would say yes, it's lots of nods. It's lots of verbal and those kind of supportive things without necessarily interrupting. And you know, and also recognizing that there can be a time where you need to interrupt. I was doing a podcast interview the other day with someone, and it was like a freight train. and I needed to interrupt, but it's about how can we do that in a respectful way. And, you know, perhaps again, I do come back to questions. So I've just got a question here. And how is it that actually by asking a question, it doesn't feel like you're trying to derail them. You're still engaging with compassionate curiosity. And I wonder if that can be something, a tool that could help as well.
So we're actually just going to do our official ending now. And for those of you who would like to stay around for another 10 minutes or so, it would be, we'd love to have you. So I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Paige for rejoining us. It's been so wonderful to have your wisdom. It just went too quickly, Paige.
Oh, thank you for having me here again, ladies. I love joining your group. And Nosh.
Yeah.
Oh, you've made his day, Paige. Made his
I
day.
remember from last time.
And look, I think we might have had about, we had 31 people register today, but we might have had 22 attend. So that was really terrific. And we'll let you know, we're just confirming, I think our next week one is actually Raylene Hall, who is located on a property 1,000 kilometres from Perth, north of Perth. And we had some requests from our survey for someone to address the topic of body image. And I put the call out on Twitter about who would be willing to share some stuff around body image and wellbeing. And Raylene said, I would really like to do that. So we're going to have a chat. It'll be really terrific to have someone from, way over from us in Victoria, way over in the direct opposite part of Australia. So we'll let you know more about that via the email. I'm going to stop recording. And, oh, great. And Annalise said Raylene's a wonderful lady. So terrific. I'm going to stop recording. Thanks for joining us. Hope to see you next week, everyone. And have a great week ahead.